first of all, that's fake. The book was written by two friars who did not have the endorsement of the church, and witch hunts really weren't a medieval thing. They were an early modern thing during the 30 Years' War. I have a whole podcast on that. You can go into it. Then he says that those deemed witches by the church included all female scholars. No, they're really... Where would you find a female scholar? There was like Catherine of Siena, but she was basically canonized into the church. So I don't know what that means. Then she says priestesses. Okay, again, there were no priestesses in the Catholic Church. Gypsies were persecuted. Nope, wrong again. That's the Holocaust. You're getting your Holocaust and your medieval, stuff mixed up. Then they said mystics were persecuted. Again, I have no idea what they mean by mystics. Like Catherine of Siena, you have Catholic mystics, but these people were revered. It's like he thinks that there are these pagan holdovers, but paganism is basically gone by the 6th or 7th century. So this just isn't a thing. Then he says other people who were persecuted were nature lovers. So you mean everyone? I mean, who didn't love nature in the Middle Ages? Everyone lived in nature. Then they said that herb gatherers were persecuted. Again, everyone? Everyone was an herb gatherer. Everyone used herbs for medicine. And then they said any women suspiciously attuned to the natural world. Again, everyone was attuned to the natural world. So it's like there's he thinks that there's a secret group of, I don't know, New Age, like this practitionism of New Age that's happening in the Middle Ages that's not happening at all. So that's false. Another thing they mentioned just in passing is that Constantine personally elevated Jesus from teacher to deity at the Council of Nicaea, getting rid of the Gnostic Gospels, got rid of Thomas, got rid of Philip, got rid of Mary Magdalene and Judas, and gave us, and those Gnostic Gospels give us the truth. Now, there's plenty of biblical scholarship that doubts the original 4 Gospels, but will say that these Gnostic Gospels they come at least a century later, so they're much less historically grounded. And there was no vote at the Council of Nicaea to create the canon out of thin air. I mean, the arguments over the canon start long before 325, and they continue long afterwards. And it's not like Constantine is hammering things out. The Syriac Christians in Persia had their own canon, and they were actually more exclusive than Latin Christians. It's not like anyone was seriously thinking of including the Gnostic Gospels in there. So
then the Ethiopian Christians had way more books in their canon. So it's not like there was and the Catholic Church had a slightly different canon for a long time than the Orthodox Church.
Hey everyone, Scott here. We're going to take a very short break for a word from our sponsors.
Yeah, this is something that the Council of Nicaea was important, but it's just one tiny corner of Christendom, and this is not anything by any means to settle it all. So that's just a very simple, like, dumb shortcut that happens.
Yeah, just as a little footnote, I believe that the official Catholic canon was not set officially until the Council of Trent, which was in the 12 or the 1300s. I should have looked that factoid up, but not at Nicaea, about 1,000 years later.
Yeah, this is pretty off. So that's a big one right there. There was this horror movie when I was in high school. Well, I think it was called Stigmata, and it also talks about like that the Gospel of Thomas is the real. That's the real stuff, man. But the church is just hiding it up, and that gets into like the government's poisoning us and sending. Have to wear tinfoiled hats because they're putting X-rays into our brain stuff. No, there's interesting ideas in there, I'm sure. Or from a scholar's standpoint, it's very interesting. Don't get me wrong on how it formed and who wrote it and the message they're trying to get across. But the idea that it's any more accurate than the earlier ones, that no. Then when there's the exposition dump with Sir Lee T. Bing, he talks about all the Da Vinci sacred feminine stuff, that the Mona Lisa was painted by Leonardo as an androgynous version of himself to show the whole of humanity being reunited by both genders coming together. No one follows that. So there's just all these stupid half-baked ideas that are presented as fact, but then they're now never challenged by anyone else. And here's one example that if you just think about it for half a second, you realize, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. And that's where they're talking about how the Eucharist was taken from other religious practices. And there's plenty of scholarly argument that, I don't know, Roman religious practices or Alexandrian religious practices, that's where the Eucharist comes from, whatever. Robert Langdon says that the Eucharist was borrowed from the Aztecs. How did Catholics steal the Eucharist from the Aztecs when they had no contact with each other until 1500? Unless, there are Catholics I don't know of that sailed across a new world in the 1st century. So that's definitely not happening. Basically, the sum of it is that almost all of these ideas about the Holy Grail actually being the bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, all of it is ripped off from a 1982 book called Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. The authors of that book actually took Dan Brown to court for plagiarism, and he came back and said that I didn't actually read the book. My wife read the book, and she would give me short plot synopses of a couple paragraphs, and then I would work that into my book. So it's like a high school student being busted for plagiarism. And he said, well, somebody else read it, and then they just gave me a summary of the Cliff Notes version, and that's how I wrote it. So Dan Brown was exonerated, but really was he? So there's your defense. Those are a few of the ideas I have on the Da Vinci Code. I probably have a ton more, but tell me why it's awesome, Steve. You're the one defending it in this episode.
Whew. I thought it was kind of interesting. They brought up groups like Opus Dei, which isn't murderers as far as I know. I don't think they've been convicted of it, being, having a deep-rooted conspiracy to murder scholars in the Louvre. There's so many little snippets of things that are interesting and that have some truth, and then he just barrels right through them. I think that's probably the best way to defend this movie, is that it's a lot of lost opportunities, little things that could have been a lot of fun and really opened up people to real history, and then he just fills it up with garbage.
Yeah, it's this is another thing too. This doesn't have to do with factual inaccuracy, but I'm amused by how bad he is at a writer. Well, frequently there's going to be an action scene, and then the book goes to a dead stop where if Robert Langdon is escaping assassins, and he runs in front of a cathedral with his female companion, whoever she is in whatever book, the book will stop and spend 1 or 2 paragraphs mentioning the history of that building. That's the pacing of an episode of Dora the Explorer, where Dora stops and turns to the camera and says, "Can you count how many monkeys there are in the trees?" And Dora at least teaches you Spanish. So, I mean, I have to give it to Dora. Like, Dora has much better pacing than a book like this. And the books the movies, they're competently produced. So they're not nearly as clumsy as that. So there's a lot of half-baked ideas in there, but I think why it's so attractive and why they become such a phenomena and the books that Dan Brown sells so well is you do feel a little bit smarter, or you hear something that you think, ooh, like a little kind of a secret little bit of information. You took something that I thought I knew very well and you spice it up. So he would say that if you look in the background of the Mona Lisa, the background behind her, the terrain, the left side is higher than the right side. That's because the left is associated with the feminine traditionally. So that is Leonardo's hidden clue that the sacred feminine is imbued with all of his works. And that's not true. That's probably just Da Vinci painting a hilly terrain, and Mona Lisa just so happened to be placed in front of it in such a way that the left side of the terrain looks higher than the right side. But you read that and you feel smarter. So you don't have to know about art history to be able to glom onto that fact and feel better about it. So I think that's something that is attractive to people, if I can understand it right.
I think this book has given more people fodder to post online or to try and refute, so to speak, Catholics or Christians, everything you see so many rejoinders on, say, Twitter or Facebook, and somebody will bust out a fact about the Council of Nicaea or some early church thing like the Gnostics, and it's straight out of Dan Brown.
Right, and if people want to really dig into this, there's a wonderful website called historyversusthedavincicode.com. It was written by one of my favorite medieval history bloggers, Tim O'Neill. I had him as a guest on my now-defunct podcast, History in 5 Minutes, ages ago. Tim's an interesting guy. He's an atheist, but he is a staunch defender of the medieval Catholic Church. So he has a master's in medieval studies. He really knows his stuff. Oh, man. So he's not defending what the bad things that the church did, but these types of half-baked historical ideas, he really tears into it. And so he's, I think, like a sort of a good middleman to get above sort of the silly culture wars that this book brought out a while ago. But even when I was going to Istanbul, I sat next to a woman who was going to Istanbul to visit her son, who was an English teacher there. And I asked her about some of the sites she wanted to see, and we mentioned the Hagia Sophia, the church commissioned by Justinian that was the largest church in the world for 1,000 years. If you're in Istanbul, definitely go see it. And she said, "Oh yeah, I can't wait to see it, to really see the hidden ideas of the sacred feminine in it." And I think I said to her, "Did you read the Da Vinci Code?" And she got excited. Yeah. And I said, "Well, what do you mean by sacred feminine?" "Well, there's mosaics of Mary in there." And I thought, okay, I mean, an Orthodox, the Theotokos, is a big idea. Yeah, I mean, there's images of Mary, but you can find plenty of belief systems in Old Norse mythology. There's plenty of female characters there, but that doesn't mean that the Vikings were very progressive in their gender politics, I would say. The raping and pillaging would argue against it. And with the Mongols as well, I'm sure in their paganistic, animistic pantheon, there were probably plenty of females as well, but that doesn't really mean anything. So it's gone far and wide, and that's another example of it. But wow, I'm overwhelmed by how much there is that could be done to unpack. To anything else, Steve, that jumps out to you that you want to address? I can't believe that's in the book.
A lot of the things that are just really basic errors, like the Council of Nicaea, had virtually nothing to do with Gnosticism. I think there was one canon that specifically called out a certain set of Gnostics who really weren't tied in at all to like these Gospels. They may have used one or two, but that the fact of the matter that most of the Gnostic Gospels were written just well after the 4 canonical Gospels. Like, this isn't something that the Catholic Church says. Even the scholars who would put the latest date of the canonical Gospels, the Gospel of John, that's still probably 100 years before any of the earliest dating of any of the Gnostic Gospels. The only one being the exception of the Gospel of Thomas, which is really early. And that one really doesn't fit well with the other Gnostic Gospels. It's not as Gnostic as what maybe someone like Elaine Pagels would say it is. And Elaine Pagels, who is a famous Harvard, she teaches at Harvard Divinity School, and she's a scholar, particularly of the Gnostic Gospels. She loved this movie. She had to say that there were some problems with it, but she thought that it nailed something special about the Gnostic Gospels.
Yeah, and there's a lot more. I'm not an art historian, so I can't speak accurately on whether it's correct or not, but there are some. If you know more, you could pull out tons of other things, such as Robert Langdon describing certain cathedrals as drab when they're these soaring Gothic cathedrals that are anything but that. There's one other thing, too. There's obviously a lot of focus on Leonardo da Vinci. The biggest thing he gets wrong is even the very title of the book, the Da Vinci Code. His name was not Da Vinci. Da Vinci just means of Vinci. That is a demonym, signifier of where you're from. That would be like calling Jesus of Nazareth of Nazareth or Lawrence of Arabia of Arabia. So if you get the title wrong right off the bat, that's problems.